come now to Movie Spotlight, our weekly segment discussing some of the latest releases at the Korean box office and online, and getting our recommendations from our film critics, who are here with me now in the studio. First, to my right, we have Darcy Paquet. Darcy, hello, it's good to see you.
Hi, it's good to be here.
And then opposite him, we have Marc Raymond here with us as well. Marc, hello to you too.
Nice to see you again.
Yes, it's great to have you both with us once again. It is a bit of a slow week for local releases, but I understand that you have some interesting international features at the moment that you're going to review for us, which you understand that you've picked for your recommendations this week as well. Marc, let us start with you today. What is your viewing recommendation in Korea this week?
Yeah, the film I'm going to talk about is Dumb Money, which is a film that got released in the fall in the United States and is now getting a limited kind of release here. It's about a very recent true event from in the early pandemic era, 2020, 2021. So again, a really quick turnaround with this kind of true story. And it's about this small-time investor named Keith Gill, who goes heavily on a stock called GameStop, video retail company, almost like the Blockbuster of video kind of game rentals, that most investors did not really believe in. They felt the company was on its way out. So they started to short the stock, meaning they were betting that it was going to fail. Right? And so the title of the film actually refers to single investors like Gill, who Wall Street refers to as dumb money because they usually lose their money investing in these kind of stocks, whereas the smart money is the powerful kind of hedge funds. So Gill ends up amassing this kind of significant online following on Reddit and YouTube, and he and his followers start to drive up the price of this stock. And this causes widespread panic amongst the hedge funds who had shorted the stock, who start losing billions of dollars basically per week at one point. And so eventually, of course, because of this, they put kind of pressure to have what is sometimes referred to as a short squeeze, meaning they're kind of going against the shorting of the stock, halted. And this leads to these kind of further congressional investigations. And so the movie basically just details basically the year of these events. It's directed by Craig Gillespie, who also has directed similar kind of true life stories. He did the movie I, Tonya with Margot Robbie, which came out about 5 years ago or so. And it stars Paul Dano in the lead and also has Seth Rogen, America Ferrera, and a huge kind of cast, like a lot of these true life kind of adaptations, because it's telling this huge story with all these characters. There's a lot of these kind of supporting kind of roles.
Sure. I think many of our listeners will remember this story in the news because it did make global headlines, and it's only from a couple of years ago or so as well. So it's a movie that has been produced very quickly, a very quick turnaround from the real life events. So what makes you recommend this film then, especially given how recent these events are?
Yeah, well, part of my recommendation is almost like I'm not really the audience for this film, and yet I still kind of liked it, and I still kind of got something out of it. And I don't know if maybe I liked it more than somebody who's really into this subject would, because a lot of it was, I mean, of course, like you said, I heard of this story, the GameStop story, because it was everywhere. But because I'm kind of allergic to investing and things like that, it's not my thing at all, not my interest. I didn't really go deep into figuring out what it was. I was like, okay, yeah, it's something about the stock market. I don't care. But, and so, and I'm also not somebody who's particularly online, which is a very online story. It's about Reddit, YouTube, and how these communities kind of formed and how this kind of put a wrinkle into the kind of power of these kind of hedge funds.
You think this film is directed at that audience then? That's the audience you think it's
I think it's partly in the style as well. It does have, and that's part of the movie I didn't like as much, but at the same time I understood why they were doing this style, because they wanted to try to recreate what it was like to be online with this YouTuber. And the performance by Paul Dano is quite good. And he really kind of gets into this guy's psychology, why he connects with all these people, and he, in the fact that he has almost like this ideological purpose on top of just making money to what he's doing, and that kind of attracts these people. So I found all of that kind of very interesting. It does a very good job of explaining what happened, like what much better than actually a lot of the documentaries on the subject did, I think. Actually, it's because again, it does a very good job of, for somebody like myself who does not know anything, and at the end of the movie I was like, yeah, I kind of understand what happened here, on the basic idea of what occurred. So that's kind of what I recommend the film, really, for the performances, for it's kind of clear depiction of what happened, why it's important. Interestingly, it's almost even somewhat at the end somewhat optimistic in the ability of bringing this kind of the ability of online culture to kind of be organized for rebellion. And even if I wasn't all that convinced of that, I did. We have enough movies and enough television shows and culture generally that's very skeptical about social media, online culture nowadays, that I was fine with a kind of an alternative kind of view on that. So yeah, ultimately I don't think it's a great film, but I thought pretty interesting, fairly well done. And again, hard to say again, I'm wondering if somebody who was really into this story might find it less compelling because they already know it. But I think that's often the case of a lot of these true life stories. Sometimes it's better if you don't know too much. You tend to maybe enjoy the story a bit more.
Right, so it's almost like a fun, almost even a documentary, a sort of recreation of what happened, but done with some of these A-list stars. Darcy, what did you think of it? Did you catch it as well?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the touchstone of this film might be something like The Big Short, which came out a number of years ago and which was also about kind of a real-life event that affected the economy, although on a much bigger scale. And in a way, I don't think this film quite lives up to that film. The Big Short was
it doesn't.
And, the stakes were bigger. It was a more important event, and just a really well-made creative film. And so this does kind of exist in the shadow of that to a certain extent. But I do love Paul Dano. I think he's such a good actor, and he's not like a huge star in the sense that he headlines big commercial films, but people who watch a lot of movies tend to really enjoy his performances, and this is just a good example because it's it's kind of a quirky character, but he really puts life into it, and his performance, I think, drives the movie in a lot of ways. And so yeah, I mean, me too. I remember this event when it was in the news, and I read a little bit about it. Didn't really go into it in too depth. Watching this film, it's like an entertaining 2 hours, and then it helps you understand the world a little better. So, even though I wouldn't say I loved it or anything like that, but I didn't regret the time that I spent watching it.
Sure, I guess a light thumbs up from both of our critics there. That was Dumb Money. It has the same alliterated title in Korean as well, and you can currently catch it in select theatres here in Korea. Darcy, let's move on to your recommendation now. What was your pick of the week?
Okay, this is kind of a special movie in the sense that it's the last film by a director who has had a very long and influential career. The director is Ken Loach. And so it's a British film. It's called The Old Oak, and it premiered at the Cannes Film Festival last year, and it just opened in Korea this week. Ken Loach, for viewers who aren't familiar with him, his career stretches back to the 1960s. He's done a lot, both on TV and on film. He has a film from 1969 called Kes, which is one of the all-time classics of British cinema, recently voted like number 7 among the best British films ever made. And then he's won the top prize at the Cannes Film Festival twice. And there are only a handful of directors who've ever done that. But he won in 2006 for The Wind That Shakes the Barley. And then in 2016 for a movie called I, Daniel Blake, which, I'll talk about this film in a moment, but I do want to recommend I, Daniel Blake as well for anybody who's interested. He's famous for films that contain strong doses of social criticism. And of course, you could say that about the British film industry in general. Like, it's kind of famous for kitchen sink dramas and everything else. But he's really kind of carved out an important place in film history with his style. And if you say a Ken Loach type film, everybody knows what you're talking about. I mean, he's now 87 years old, and he says that this is his last film. You can't always trust directors when they say that. Sometimes they get bored in retirement and then decide to come back for one more, but it does seem likely that this will be his last film. And for no other reason than that, it's worth watching to kind of mark the end of this great career of his.
Sure. Directors like Miyazaki and
Yes.
Steven Soderbergh come to mind when we say about short-lived retirements by famous directors. Okay, so The Old Oak in Korea, the title is Nae Old Oak, which translates to My Old Oak. So, Darcy, can you tell us a bit more about the storyline, what's it about?
Yes. The title refers to a pub, and so there's a pub in this small working class town that's called the Old Oak. And like everything else in the town, the pub is kind of struggling. And it's a community that used to be really centered around a coal mine. And then, there was some labor unrest in the 60s, and like a lot of the coal mines around the world, it eventually kind of fell in hard times. This was shut down, and the town has really been kind of hollowed out. At the beginning, the film makes reference to the fact that the real estate market has just kind of completely crashed, and that people are buying up. These funds from other countries are buying up apartments for just outrageously low prices, and so people who live in the town, their homes are worthless, and they're it's a really depressing kind of place to live. And then but a lot of new people start moving into the town, and this community, it's Syrian refugees who are being resettled in the town. In one sense, it makes sense because the housing is cheap and they can kind of restart their lives there, but it does cause a lot of tension among the people who had lived there originally. So the plot focuses on the owner of the pub, who's a middle-aged man kind of struggling to keep things going. There's a young Syrian woman who's just moved in, and the two of them end up becoming kind of allies in an effort to try to revive the community, both for the newcomers and then also the people who lived there previously.
Right, and so Darcy, you think the film works then?
It does. I mean, they're kind of two. I have two minds about the film, and there are two ways to watch the film, because he's a master at kind of exploring these different issues and bringing them up in a way that's very vivid and that pulls you into the story. With a lot of his films, if you read the synopsis, it sounds like a miserable way to spend 2 hours, but then when you actually sit down and start watching the film, it pulls you right in. I think that if we kind of step back and from a more cold-hearted perspective, try to evaluate the film as a film critic. It's not as subtle as some of his other films have been. And it also doesn't have the strength of movies like I, Daniel Blake, or other films in the past. This one, I mean, some people have called it a bit sentimental. I don't know if that's quite the right word, but the characters express themselves in a very direct kind of way. They just speak whatever's in their hearts. And, in real life, people don't often speak that way. And then some of the conflicts in the film are resolved quite easily, even if on the whole, it has a very realistic view on life. And so it's sort of a mix. I do recommend the film. It's not as realistic as some of his other films, but it is really engaging, I think.
Right. It's not his best work, but it's still a Ken Loach film. Marc, did you catch it? What do you think of it?
Yeah, I had a interesting in terms of Darcy's response. I felt that way about I, Daniel Blake and his last film, Sorry to Have Missed You, I believe it was called. I found those a bit too on the nose and too kind of manipulative. And even though I agreed with the politics of those films and I agree with a lot of the leftist politics, this one I liked a lot more, interestingly. I felt, and maybe it's the issue more than the execution. I don't know, like the immigration issue is one that I'm quite passionate about, and so maybe I just kind of ignored maybe the flaws just because I agreed with them, and I thought the ending of this film also very moving, and so I really liked this one. I thought it worked a little bit better. I didn't really. There's always like a tricky kind of balance when you're trying to make an issue film, and like how much do you push the issue, and if you push it too much, does it just become like didactic and you feel like you're being preached at? And I found that a little bit with I, Daniel Blake, and less so with this one. So yeah, I really like this film. I would recommend it as well.
Yeah, it still sounds like a very interesting film. In fact, two very interesting foreign films to look out for this week. And that's where we're going to wrap it up. Darcy, Mark, thank you for your recommendations, and we'll catch you again next time.
Okay, have a great day.